All right, welcome back to Undulations, or should I say,
welcome back to Undulations.
all right, so you might have heard that Arturia released a vocoder edition of the MicroFreak. It's a different color, got some different designs on it, and it ships with a classic vocoder style gooseneck mic. And that's nice if you have it, this video will apply, but if you're like me and have one of the original MicroFreaks, don't despair, you can do vocoder stuff on this as well. So to do that, the first thing is that you need to update your MicroFreak using the Arturia editor software. And so that puts in a new Vocoder Synthesis Mode that's up after the relatively new noise mode. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that while a company like Arturia can update software and add a synthesis mode, that makes perfect sense. What is sort of surprising is that we've had this microphone capacity in the headphone jack of our MicroFreaks all along. And so it's nice to finally realize that and be able to take advantage of it. Now, what do I mean by that? The headphone jack is a 4-conductor jack. And so you'll hear this referred to as a TRRS jack. That's tip, ring, ring, shield. And a regular stereo aux jack is just TRS. That's a 3-conductor. And then you'll also have a mono jack, which is a TS jack. I'm just going to call them 2, 3, and 4 for simplicity. So we've got a 4-conductor jack here, and the easiest way to get some immediate vocoder sounds out of your MicroFreak is to just use a 4-conductor headphone. So I've got sort of a show and tell spread here, and I'm just going to go through quickly and show you all the things that I have gotten to work with it. And then in a little bit, we'll go over to the other table and take a look at the details of how to set things up and change the synthesis parameters. So let's see, this has been really nice. This is a set of Beats headphones. It's a 4-conductor, so it uses the inline mic on here, and you can hear the vocoder back in the headphones. Makes perfect sense. Now, this is the point to bring up that if you do that, then how do you get your sound so that someone else can hear it or so that you can record it or that sort of thing? Don't forget that the MicroFreak also has a line out. And I really want to make it clear that the line out on the MicroFreak is a balanced output. So if you've got an audio interface that accepts balanced input, that's great. Or if you have balanced monitors, that's great. But not everybody has a balanced destination to take this signal to. And so I want to point out that what you can do is take a simple splitter, like this is a 3-conductor aux plug, and then these are 2 mono plugs over here. What I can do is just put an adapter on here to turn it into a 1/4 inch. That can go into the line out on my MicroFreak. And so I've got the 2 balanced signals here split. Balance just means that they're of different phases. If you combine these improperly, then you'll end up with no sound at all, or it'll be very muted. So what you want to do, you can put both of these into a mixer like the Dude or whatever your mixer is, and just use one of them. It'll be half volume, but you can turn stuff up on the mixer or on the MicroFreak. And so that would enable you to use earbuds with an inline mic in the headphone jack, and then either record or generate sound in your venue or whatever through the line out. So it can be done with a 4-conductor input device. And I've tried it with a bunch. Here's a set of, I guess these are Smokin' Buds or something like that. They're nice headphones. Inline mic works fine on them. I got it to work with a Sony PS4 headset. So works good with that. That's the 4-conductor stuff. But I want to say that if you really want to do a lot of different things with this, then you need to get a particular type of splitter, and it's this, all right? It is a 4-conductor 3.5 millimeter plug on this side, and then you've got a couple of jacks on this side. They're color coded in the classic way. For green, that's where you would just be able to get the headphones out, and then this red is the mic input. And let me just show that up close. And you can get this sort of splitter online. It's relatively inexpensive, but you got to make sure to get one that is a headphone and mic splitter. And unfortunately, in the Arturia manual, they talk about just using a headphone splitter, which is what, for example, this is. This shipped with the polyphonic whale that I have. This is just so two people can listen to the same thing on their headphones. So it's 3 conductors over here, 3 conductors here, 3 conductors there, and it's just a splitter, plain and simple. It's not what we need. This thing, I don't even know quite how it works, but it's taking 4 and sending, I think, 3 to one and a different 3 to the other. And so that's what we need. That's what we're going to use for a lot of this video. All right, so you plug the 4 into the MicroFreak, and then I've got headphones. I can just listen to it in the green one, and then this is ready for any sort of 3-conductor mic. And so to that end, I did the opener of this video with this Rode mic and an aux cable. That works fine. You can actually use the polyphonic whale as a microphone. That worked fine. I've used this lav mic. I just did a lot of testing. This lav mic, which is the same as the one I'm talking to you on right now, that worked fine. And actually this thing, which is for recording conferences, you just put it on a table, it works surprisingly well. That's a 3-conductor mic. And then even this 3-conductor capsule mic, that works fine too. So I haven't really found anything that doesn't work. And the last thing I'll say about all of this stuff is that if you're going to use something that has 2 conductors, well, it won't work straight into this pink plug on this thing. But if you get a splitter, so this is a 3-conductor splitter with a 2-conductor jack and another 2-conductor jack, you can actually get 2-conductor mics to work. I've gotten a old cassette mic to work fine, and this is a karaoke mic that works fine. But the place where, and the whole reason I'm leading up to this, the place where this gets interesting is that you can also get a EMF mic to work, and you can even get a contact mic to work. And as a big fan of contact mics, I think this is really important, and we're going to get back to that in just a second. But the most important thing to me, at least, because I'm not a big singer and I'm not going to read you guys poetry through the vocoder or anything like that, but you can also send other devices, other either instruments, acoustic instruments, or synths through the vocoder and get some very interesting effects. Now, I thought I was going to have to do some special stuff to make that happen. I've got an attenuator cable here that lets you go from a line out source, so something like a pocket operator or that sort of thing, to a microphone input. It just drops the signal a lot. I thought, well, I'll need this, and then that way I'll be able to do synths through the vocoder. But turns out not to be required at all. You can just do it with an aux cable. You can take any synth you got and run it through the vocoder, and that is going to be something that is very fun and interesting to do. Now, we'll see more about how that works in a second, but I just want to say that Arturia did a great job of letting you control the gain on the microphone input, where that you can actually reduce the signal, so that lets you use synths. They do warn not to use Eurorack level volumes. So if you're going to do Eurorack into this, do it out of a headphone output, not anything that's at really hot voltage. But you can go from a synth output, like say a Volca or something like that, and choose the proper gain. But then on the other hand, you can go to some of the weakest mics out of all this whole set and have that work too. So it is, I have to say, a great setup for doing a diverse amount of things with the vocoder. Now, that raises the question, what does the vocoder actually do? And so that's what I want to talk about next. Yeah, so now I want to talk about what a vocoder does, what it is, and we know sort of the musical effect of it, the musical background of it. I like to listen to Daft Punk, so I hear it all the time. But the origin of it is actually from the telecom industry wanting to cut down the information, basically compress a voice. And one way to do that is to sort of deconstruct the voice and send some sort of just the bare minimum information of somebody's voice through the phone line and then reconstruct it on the other side. So it's sort of a voice synthesis thing. And that's basically where it all comes from. But what does that mean in terms of musical things that we can understand? To talk about that, I want to use one of my favorite little instruments, a kalimba. And I've got a contact mic hooked to it in these demos. And I just want to show you several different demos where that I'm using some audio effects, and then I'm also using the vocoder, and we're going to think about what's going on and try to compare the vocoder synthesis mode on the MicroFreak. So this first demo is the kalimba being sent through a time-dependent filter. It's the Dwarfcraft Devices happiness pedal. And take a listen. All right, so file that away and then take a listen to this second version of it. This is kalimba contact mic going through the Dwarfcraft Devices Ghost Fax, which is sort of a phaser pedal. And it sounds like this. Okay, and so now I'm going to play the kalimba through the vocoder synthesis mode on the MicroFreak, and that sounds like this. And so the real point that I want to make is that the third thing, the vocoder thing, is completely different than the first two. In the first two, the audio from the kalimba is passing through either a time-dependent filter or the time-dependent phaser. And so you've got literally the kalimba audio getting modulated by one of the pedals and coming out, and that's what we're hearing. We're still hearing the kalimba audio, but in the vocoder case, it's totally different. We're not hearing the kalimba audio. Now, I put a little bit of dry in there so we do hear the kalimba audio, but that's just from an air mic that I had set up nearby, just to kind of give it some context. But as far as the actual signal coming through the MicroFreak, we never hear that. You never hear somebody's voice actually coming through the vocoder. So what are we hearing? The sound source is actually the MicroFreak itself. And so you choose what the sounds are by what you play on the keyboard, And there are some other settings about different types of either a saw wave or pulse width modulated waves. We'll get to that in a second. Also noise. But what I really want to say is that in this third case, it's actually the kalimba that is the effect. Okay? It is our voices that are the effect. And so one way to visualize all of this is that you've got, say, a chord played on the MicroFreak, and it's coming up to a bunch of filters that are by default turned down, so sound doesn't get through. And so the signal that comes into the mic at different frequencies, that's going to sort of open the gates for the source signal on the MicroFreak to be able to come out, and that's what we hear in the vocoder mode. So think of that we've got a chord playing, for example, on the MicroFreak, and can't hear anything because it's sort of like these EQ mixers. Just think of a wide EQ mixing board with everything down. And then if you're familiar with envelope followers, that's really what's going on here. There are a bunch of frequency dependent envelope followers, so that when I hit a note on the kalimba, it's like, okay, on the vocoder, since we heard this particular pitch on the kalimba, we're going to open the gate, and so that's the envelope follower thing. We're going to turn on the sound at that particular frequency. And even a kalimba's got some different harmonics and that sort of thing. So there's a pattern, a time-dependent pattern, especially if I do like a chord on the kalimba, a time-dependent pattern that we open and then gradually close. And so that's what we're hearing as the MicroFreak sound gets modulated by the kalimba as a function of frequency. And certainly somebody's voice, my voice, yours, it's got unique fundamentals, partials, harmonics, however you want to think about it. Formants, I guess, would be the right term for voices. And so as these formants start to build up and decay over time, when we say certain vowels in particular, vocoders are particularly sensitive to vowels, and consonants tend to be more a problematic thing to generate. We'll talk some about that with some of the actual settings on here, but that's basically what's going on, is that voice, instrument, synthesizer, whatever you use as the input to the vocoder, that becomes the modulation source as a function of frequency for this signal that's being generated by the MicroFreak, basically continuously, but held back, attenuated. And so you can get a lot of very elegant things in terms of voice, but also you can get some really interesting things in terms of synthesis. And so that's the direction that I want to go at this point, is I'm going to start hooking synthesizers up to the vocoder mode on the MicroFreak, and that's going to be a way for us to very clearly see sort of what's going on with the different settings and that sort of thing. And then after that, I'll probably just close this out with another demo where I hook the O-Coast to the MicroFreak vocoder mode, and that's pretty cool. So let's take a closer look at the vocoder mode itself. Okay, so I've got a init preset here on the MicroFreak, and as always, it starts as a bass template. In most cases, that's just a label to help you keep track of things, but for vocoder presets, it actually turns out to be pretty important to use the right preset label. And the reason for that is that if I save this preset and I'll click, and now that I can choose the genre, not sure how easy that is to see, but I've rolled it over to vocoder, and I'm going to click that, and then I'll just call it knit instead of init, and then hit save. And so now there's a little VU meter here on the display that for vocoder presets gives you an idea of whether you have any incoming signal or not. Now, I don't have the sound hooked up yet. We'll get to that in just a second, but if I roll the synthesis type all the way to the very end, so we go through all the original ones, and then the next to last one is noise now, and then very last is vocoder. Now we're set up, and I'm just going to hang on a second, and this will come back to sort of the default mode. And you can see me talking. I've got a mic here. If I tap it, it'll show up as signal on that VU meter. And so this is a nice visual feedback to make sure that you've got a signal coming in for the vocoder to work with. Now, next thing is that we should look at some of the settings for the vocoder. And there are some global settings, and so they apply to all of your presets. If I scroll down through MIDI, sync, CV gate, browsing, master tuning to mic settings, the mic settings are some of the most important things for the vocoder. They are the mic gain, which has got a range that goes from -12 dB, so that would be attenuating your signal quite a bit, all the way up to, let's see, there's 59. So it can go up to 59 dB, and if you set it to 60, it does auto gain. All right, now I had it on 35. I'll put it back to that. And then the other thing that you can set is the noise gate. So this is a sort of threshold where the background noise doesn't just come straight through the vocoder. So if you're doing something live, like have other instruments around you or that sort of thing, that's going to be a way to sort of make sure that they don't intrude upon your vocoder signal. Then the last thing is mic detection. You can set it up to be auto detecting the mic. I think just play with that to decide whether you like that or not. So those are the global settings, but then there's also a preset level setting so when I click preset, these are things that are for a given preset. And if you come down a bit, there's vocoder hiss mode and vocoder hiss volume. And this vocoder hiss thing is basically related to the thing I was saying about vowels being interpreted well by a vocoder and consonants not so much. So the hiss mode sort of takes your consonants and kind of, I don't know, it's almost sort of like a dry signal, basically, where that you get certain things that the vocoder can't process come through, and so it sort of fills things in a little bit. I tend to have it off, but again, that's another thing when you're setting up your own sound to just potentially explore. Okay, so we're going to get to some sounds in just a second. The first thing I want to do is show you a synth sound source that I'm going to be using as the vocoder source for the MicroFreak. All right, so now this is my modular synthesis pod, and please just ignore like 90% of it. What I'm going to do is use this as a signal into the MicroFreak. I'm using the Plaits module, and it's got a nice tone that I'm going to be able to sweep the frequency of. And so I just want you to realize that it's got a little bit of structure to it, so it's not a pure sine wave. There's some harmonics on it. But the main thing is that there are no steps to it. It doesn't have any type of either filtering or such that causes stepping. It's very smooth. And then the next thing is that I'm going to also use Plaits as a noise source. I come over to the noise side of it, and I'm going to be able to sweep the noise like this. So the reason I'm using this is just a good module that has both a tone that's sweepable and noise that's sweepable, which will be useful for what we're going to talk about with the vocoder. Okay, so now we're really in a position to sort of understand and go through what the synthesis parameters are for the vocoder synthesis mode on the MicroFreak. And I've got the pod set up over here for the signal source. And so what I want you to think about is that there is a signal path where that it's basically a chain of things: the keyboard, the vocoder module, and then that module being affected by whatever the external source is, be it a synthesizer like this or a voice. And then that is all going to come out as a standard MicroFreak sound, and it can be influenced by the MicroFreak filter as well. And I don't want to forget to say that while I'm turning all these knobs by hand for these synthesis parameters on the vocoder, they can, just like any other mode, be animated, modulated by the mod matrix. So using the cycling envelope or the low frequency oscillator, you can have your vocoder have a time dependence both in the settings as well as in the filter setting. And then of course you can also do things like arpeggios and such on the keyboard. By the way, I'm in paraphonic mode now because chords sound really good with the vocoder. But it's a lot to sort of think about, but just think of it as a flow. And the very beginning of the flow is, I'm going to turn on hold and put a single note in. So we can hear that now. And I'm going to sweep the source over here just to give you an idea that some things are much louder than others. So frequency is too high up on that side as a source, and then it's too low on this side. So there's sort of a middle range where that it basically opens up the vocoder. And so I'm going to leave it something like that. And then let's look at some of these other things. The first parameter, the wave parameter, that determines what our type of MicroFreak signal is going to be. So not the incoming signal, but what is the keyboard actually going to play. And at the very bottom you've got a saw wave, and then there's a pulse width. So it's basically a square wave train that has different sort of gaps between the pulses, and you can go anywhere from, I think it was 50% at the bottom, yeah, up to maybe 90, high 90s. Okay, and so one thing to think about that all of these things have in common as far as the sound type, like the wave type, is that it's not going to be a straight up sine wave or triangle wave that's very focused in a single frequency. It's going to be things like the saw or pulse width that have got a broader frequency range. And this allows the source that we're playing here to pass through a bunch of different of the little filters or EQs on the vocoder. This will make more sense in a second when we talk about the bandwidth. All right, but then at the very top, there's also noise. And noise actually has a very broad frequency spectrum, so I find that it doesn't really work that great with voice, for me at least, or maybe I don't have it quite set up right, but for synth stuff it can be kind of a cool sound. But it is so different that I almost want to say that there are really just like sort of two main things that you can set, either noise or not noise on the wave, and then the rest of it is sort of subtle. Okay, then this middle knob, the timbre knob, is in this case being used as a sort of overall frequency window of the whole vocoder setup. And so when I run that high, it'll run the output tone high, and when I run it low, it'll darken it. And so I'm just going to leave that sort of in the middle, and I'm going to leave this sort of in the middle. The most important setting in my mind is the bandwidth setting, and this is the bandwidth of the little filters, the things that I was talking about. Is sort of like EQ ranges, and you can set them narrow by turning this all the way down. And now when I sweep the frequency, so this is why I'm doing this whole thing with sweeping the modulars, because now we can hear the structure of the individual vocoder filters. And another thing you'll notice is that the more narrow it is, you might have to turn up the volume. But as I increase this, we don't hear those individual steps as clearly. And so that's where the bandwidths of these EQ filters in the vocoder sort of blur together. And so I feel like that in the middle you get more full sound. Near the top you get sort of a muddy sound, and this applies to voice as well, which I'll do in a little bit. And then down, setting the bandwidths very narrow, you get more of what I think of as sort of a glassy sound. And now's the point to change our input. I'm just going to put a chord in. I'll put in a suspended. You'll see that if I, for example, change down to the saw, that it has some different quality, but it's fundamentally the same. The big difference is the noise. And I'll come back into pulse width, and then we can, I'll, for example, darken this. And when you lower, for example, the frequency of the vocoder, you can also just lower the keyboard settings too. So I drop down an octave to try and sort of match it. All right, and then the last thing with the modular here, what if we have a noise source? So this is a very broad source, okay? And I'm gonna come back up in volume, in octave, and play another, I'll actually just play an octave right here. All right, did that work? I think it did. Okay. Now, as I sweep this, it's completely different, and you can actually do noise on as a source and as the vocoder. Sounds like that, but I think it's better like this. You get a better idea. I'm going to turn this up a little bit and boost this a little bit. And so kind of just gives an idea that whatever your source is, you're going to, based on the frequency spectrum of your source and the type of chord you got going, you're going to be able to get completely different sounds, and that's all sort of transformed by the synthesis settings. All right, so I'm back on the tone setting on the modular, and so you can just sort of explore the synthesis parameters, and I really like this fairly low, the bandwidth, and gives some nice sounds, and then you know, you can apply the filter. All right, so now that we know enough about the parameters and I've kind of shown you what it does when you're just running a plain signal through it, I'm going to use this little Rhodes mic and actually talking to it. I've got my main mic going also, so at some points I may try and run both of the signals so you have a better idea of what I'm actually saying. I think that to start with, I'm just going to hit hold and put in a single note. So that is going to be like this.
It sounds like this right now.
And let's just inspect these settings. I'm on saw. I've got the main frequency setting, overall frequency setting sort of in the middle. And then I've got the bandwidths fairly low.
Alright, so that sounds like this.
And I'm just going to start changing the vocoder wave source. This is some pulse width, so it gives it a different character. And this is highest pulse width. And then the noise, it's completely different. Now I'm going to come back down to something like in the middle of the pulse width, and we'll see what changing the overall frequency does. So this is in the middle, and this is low. This is high. Now I'm going to go with the pulse width in the middle, the bandwidth overall in the middle, and then let's sort of explore these smaller bandwidths. This is the very bottom, so this is sort of the glassy type setting that I've talked about. Then as I increase it, you get a little bit muddier. Now as a final thing, let's just see what it does when I change different things on the keyboard. So this is a single note. Now I'm going to play a chord. This is with a chord. All right, let's leave it at that. All right, so that's the Vocoder Synthesis Mode for the Arturia MicroFreak. And I think it seems well implemented and it's interesting to play around with. Now, I'm not a singer. I've never really done much or sought anything out about vocoders before, so it was an interesting way to learn about them too. And for those of you that are singers, if you get a chance, leave me a comment. Let me know how this synthesis mode works in sort of its intended use case. Now, to close this video out, I started thinking about what synth made sense to hook up to it and sort of modulate the vocoder with. You want something that's sort of voice-like, and so the voiciest of all my synths is probably the Makenoise No Coast. So I patched some stuff up on that and made some modulation settings on the MicroFreak itself, and I think it turned out quite nice. So check that out, and I appreciate everybody watching, and I will see you soon in the next video.